Welcome to another episode of the Uncertainty of podcast. And today we're talking about safety culture evolution, forwards or backwards. And our guest speaker is Trish Ross, and Gary and Trish will give a more detailed introduction in a minute. But if you are joining us for the first time, this is our 5th show in the Uncertainty series, and really excited about today's guest and topic. And as humans, we are good at creating safety regulations, standards, policies, compliance rules, best practices, which leads to certainty. If we do this, then we get that. In this show, we will explore how companies and organizations are dealing with uncertainty in the real world. So by uncertainty, we mean if we do this, we may not get that. So, well, that's not good and needs fixing. So the tendency is for management is the unwittingly pile of more restrictions like regulations, rules to force us back to certainty. And what's the impact of the safety culture when we take that approach? So just a reminder, if you have questions or comments, the chat should be open. If the chat's not open for any reason, we do have the Q&A option as well. So definitely share your questions and comments, and we will do our best to get to them throughout the episode today. And without further ado, I will turn it over to Gary Wong.
Thanks, Scott. Well, hi, everyone. And safety culture is one of those really interesting topics. And as we know, culture has a lot of different definitions. There's no really one right one. A commonly one that's really heard, and I've heard, and I've even used it, is how things get done around here. Another definition is the set or system of beliefs, practices, and assumptions. I like the one that Karsten Bush talked about, really interesting one. What he said was culture is a patterned way that an organization responds to its challenges. He also said that culture itself is neither positive or negative. So it's not about a good or bad, better or worse culture, but more about our preferences or the pattern which we have chosen to adopt. So today, what I want to do is talk about those patterns and explore how the organization is treating its workers for its current conditions. So joining Scott and me, as you mentioned, is Trish. Trish, welcome aboard.
Good morning, everyone. And it's an honor to be invited to speak with everyone about this, because I am a freelance consultant. You'll notice in the invitation, it does state that I'm with Workplace Learning Systems. I do some contract work for them, have in the past. I also do contract work for Safety by Design in Houston, as well as other companies, along with direct work to many organizations with world-class safety culture, all the way down to no culture whatsoever, no safety. So this is a very near and dear to my heart type of topic. And I'm really excited to be able to share some information with you and look forward to hearing what you all have to say that can help us better understand what to do in the cases that we're in a situation where safety is declining. Perhaps we can come up with some solutions.
Yeah. So I've asked Trish to join us because of a comment made during the March show when we explored aviation safety culture. And if you haven't seen that, you can go onto the Safeopedia website, click on that and watch that. But what really caught my attention was the comment that Trish put on there. And she did say, we're going backwards to a disposable worker mentality. So disposable worker, can you elaborate on that?
Those who have the luxury of working for world-class safety culture type companies may not have a clue what I'm referring to. Out in the real world, especially small to mid-sized companies, we have many situations that are causing both the executives, the executives and the workers, including the safety professionals, to feel disposable. They are no longer feeling as though the company wants to protect them. It's about protecting the almighty dollar. And that's always been a mentality. A lot of this comes from global workforce. You have people coming from many areas in the world, including the United States, unfortunately, where you get a job so that you can support your family. And the company they're not providing time. They're not providing time for training. They're not providing the resources that you need. The mentality overall is just get her done. And if anything happens, we've got 100 people lined up waiting to take your job. So don't rock the boat. Get her done. If you get hurt, well, if you can't do your job, you're out of here.
So one of the things we like to do in the series is to help people understand and how to actually, I don't like to use the word fix, but make things better. So Trish, when you said disposable worker, that made me think of a timeline showing the evolution of safety thinking through different ages. But before I show that, I first need to describe the evolution of business practices. And why do I want to do that? It's because safety reflects how a business treats its workforce. And as you just said, it's all about the mighty dollar. You can imagine how the worker is going to be treated that way. So let me just show you a slide. This is one, if you haven't seen before, called the sigmoid curve. Now, the sigmoid curve, which was developed by Charles Handy, essentially it's like an S curve on its side. What it does show the stages of life from beginning to end. And as long as a product can solve a problem or fill a need, it will add value. So you can see you're going up on the curve. But when a better solution arrives, or perhaps the current product value declines because it can't solve the current problems, it starts to near its end life. What we have is this really interesting yellow bubble. It's an area of uncertainty. For customers, do I risk buying the new or stay with the tried and proven? For manufacturers, when do I jump onto this new curve? So let me take that curve and let me just apply it to how we've seen businesses evolve over the past couple of centuries. And I'll start back into the mid to late 1800s, where at that time, the business focus was on the manufacturing and production of hard goods. What was available to learn from that time? Well, all that people had, managers, if you want to call them managers, was the church and the military. So we got vertical hierarchical structure from the church. The word company comes from the military. So around the 1920s, Frederick Taylor introduced scientific management. Later, 1950s, systems thinking emerged, and the dominant paradigm shifted to engineering. And the reason why that happened is because of technology. We had a breakthrough, which was computer, hardware, and software. Now we could use this idea in systems thinking about creating idealistic future state models. And then we can create a certain predictable system order. And boy, we like order. We all like order. So if we can get certainty and predictability, use a computer, why not? Now, when you see that word reductionism, that means we got into the practice of breaking models down into smaller parts to fix or improve. And then later we put the parts back together again. And if you're working as a mechanic in machines, that works really well. But then we discovered some things could not and should not be reduced. We also acknowledged there were also systems of complexity where the future is unpredictable. So that leads me to this slide here. This is just an expansion of the previous slide. Hopefully everybody can read that, it's not too busy. So we said, okay, we know now there is a system of complexity, and that's what this whole series has been about, where the future is unpredictable. We just don't know what's going to happen in the future. So instead of a mechanistic engineering paradigm, we start looking through the lens of ecology, which is the preferred way to go now. And also, oops, sorry for that. We also kind of blend in what we've learned from other sciences and other fields, such as cognitive research, where we no longer see the brain as a store retrieve information processor. And that was a very popular way of looking at things during the age of engineering. But what we discover now is that the human brain's true power is recognizing patterns, not storing and retrieving information, but recognizing patterns. And as I said earlier, the evolution of safety thinking reflects or mirrors that of business practices. Scientific management heralded the age of technology. So what did we see at that time? We saw village farmers moving into cities to work in factories. Humans were essentially treated as cogs in a machine. Those disposable workers. So if you think of Charlie Chaplin's Modern Times movie, 1932, that whole movie was about that. How are we treating employees here? Now, that worked for a while, then obviously people started to push back. That led to the rise of the age of human factors in the 1940s, when workers and unionists, they pushed back to improve working conditions. That went on for a while as we did that. Then again, we said computer hardware, software helped with that. But then again, we also entered the era of business process reengineering, BPR. And an area that I really got involved in was change management models in the ordered system here. So this is interesting. This led to a shift from treating humans as cogs to hazards to be constrained by process and technology. Now, the age of safety management denotes another paradigm shift. It's going from the idealistic order to a real world that includes complexity and chaos. And in last month's show with Scott and I did, talking about chefs and recipe followers, this is what we're talking about now, right? In the idealistic order world, it's good to be a recipe follower. But when you got complexity, perhaps you have to be a chef. In this particular diagram, we also can talk about that in terms of humans being treated as heroes, adjusting for varying conditions. Now, this whole diagram, as you can see, it's evolutionary. What do I mean by that? It means that as we move from yellow bubble to yellow bubble, we take the best with us, but we leave the myths and the fallacies behind. Perhaps we just use science to discover that, okay, what we thought was correct is no longer correct. So we leave that behind, but we take the good stuff with us. I will make a point about when people talk about Taylorism and scientific management as being bad. No, what we've done is that we take the best parts of that. And one of the really good things that Frederick Taylor talked about is the ideal of the master and apprenticeship model. We seem to have lost that when we went into this age of engineering and where we talked a bit about how process and technology can essentially replace the human. And we lost that. Now we're trying to recover from that. And you can see that in terms of master's and apprenticeship programs that seem to be reinvigorated again, which I think is a good thing. Now, in the age of cognitive complexity, we treat humans not as machines, but as storytellers. We like to listen to worker experiences when they were treated as the greatest asset. But there's also times when they feel worthless, ready to be discarded. And the human brain can recognize the patterns formed by shared stories. And recall what Carson said, right? Culture is the patterned way that an organization responds to its challenges. So that was a little quickie 101 on where we are. And Trish, if you look at this diagram, where is the disposable worker?
And honestly, the disposable worker is coming into the human factors. I say that from my perspective simply because it's a total reactive situation. The dynamic, the complexity of it. We can all look at the scale and we can see it in a different place, but that's based on our perspective. So when it comes to the disposable worker, yes, technology is creating that effect because it's taken the human piece out of it. And it's making those who are the recipients of what's being pushed down to them, or the information that's being pushed up to executives to make these decisions, it's giving an illusion versus the actual humanism. At least that's how I see it. But we're just not referring to those workers on the production line. Again, we're talking about those that are up higher, that are receiving data and information, and those below who's having whatever decisions are made from the executives pushed down to them.
Okay, so definitely what we try to do in this uncertainty series is it's really, really easy to focus on behaviors and humans. And well, we can also talk about, oh, you've got a bad culture. I think what we want to do is get away from that and look at it from a different perspective. So instead of viewing it as a bad culture, let's take the approach, it is what it is, and ask, why are people feeling that they are being treated as disposable, or why they're being treated as greatest assets here? What are the systemic conditions influencing management to give this impression? And I'm just looking at some of the chat comments here. And I'd ask you to, when you look at your comments here, just think about what are those systemic conditions that perhaps are seeing the floor team doing great with PPE, but supervisors not following standard rules. Don't look at the supervisors or the people. Look at the systemic conditions around them. That's the environment here. So Trish, anything further on that you want to talk about? Like, what were the conditions at the turn of the 20th century, at the age of technology, when people were being treated as cogs?
It's actually the same as today. And this is why I feel we're declining. Managers, they weren't stupid. They were just ignorant. Workers are ignorant. We can educate ignorance. Once you're educated, then it's a choice. And then it becomes stupidity. And what's the nature of stupidity? Doing the same thing over and over, expecting better results, right? There are many workers available. It's easier to replace them than it is to train and develop them. It's easier to put I hate the word blame and fault. It's easier to place fault and blame on an individual than it is to take it as a learning opportunity. And as we've talked about, I'm an opportunist. Everything is continuous improvement. Everything is an opportunity for improvement. But management, especially if you're middle management, right? They are so pressured. Production. They don't have the time, or they feel as though they don't have the time to make that investment. They don't feel like they have executive support to make that investment. And it's all about production. And so you have that mentality throughout the entire culture that everything's about profit.
Yeah. Okay. So let's now take it to the 21st century together. And now we've got more conditions that exist today than it did back then. And here, Trish and I talked about a laundry list of a few things. So one is, we're talking about the labor supply. Now we're facing the aging workers with guys like me, boomers, who are kind of like no longer there. And I've taken my knowledge and skills with me as well. And we've got health issues, right? Right, Trish? Right? So,
yes.
And I think what we've also got is more understanding and learning. We didn't know what some of these health issues were before, but now we do. And, and so the HR person now is dealing with a lot more things. We've got diversity, equity, inclusion, DEI things, which didn't have back then. And the one that I think we're all going to be hitting, of course, is technology, right? Robotics, artificial intelligence. And if you haven't been part of that discussion or debate, is AI going to be a help or hindrance? Well, nobody really knows yet. So I think I like to look at it as artificial intelligence as it is what it is. right? What are the conditions that you have in your company that will, when you introduce artificial intelligence, make it a benefit, an asset, or a liability, right? And then we got other stuff, like we got legal stuff, we've got politics. And oh yeah, a couple of shows ago, we had Megan Garrett on and we talked about ESG and sustainability. So I think there's a lot of stuff on people's plates nowadays. Don't you agree?
Absolutely. And just there are a lot of folks out there, especially safety professionals, that aren't in a higher profile situation. Just so you know, ESG is environmental social governance. It applies to corporations. It was introduced, I believe, November of last year, is when it was mandated and became regulatory. So all of these companies that want to remain viable, their stock market, their stock has a metric set to it. It's an ESG metric. And I encourage you to do some research, because I feel as though this is going to be detrimental to us as safety professionals trying to do our job. It's going to create a lot of complications for us. ESG outlines specific parameters on climate change, what the companies have to do to prove climate change viability, sustainability, the transgenderism. I mean, it's very specific about LGBTQ plus inclusion. There are a lot of very specific things in there. So I think it's important. I'm not trying to go off topic, but I think it's very important for us as safety professionals to understand what that's going to bring in, especially and we're going to talk a little more about equity investment companies that are buying up the small to mid-sized companies, and how that's going to affect us as safety professionals and how we can do our job and get through to those workers who perhaps they feel pro or con about the ESG requirements.
Right, good stuff. Okay, let me go back to that comment that you made, which really inspired me. If you don't like it, go elsewhere. That is a pattern. But let's look at it from the worker's personal perspective. It's also a moment of uncertainty. It's what we call a weak signal that requires a decision. They have a choice to make. So Trish, what are the sort of choices that a worker has if they're told, if you don't like it, go elsewhere?
There's one made out of fear. Just go ahead, go with it. Don't rock the boat. And then if you're ignorant, you're putting your life at risk, perhaps. If you're strong and you have courage, you'll choose to leave the company. And then you're sitting there wondering, do I leave the company, or am I going to end up in the same situation someplace else? Or get involved, share your stories, start from the bottom in the workforce, and you get engaged and you own and direct safety from the bottom up, which is my niche, by the way. My niche is employee owned, employee directed safety. And a lot of workers don't understand they have that power. So I think it's very important for us. And I'm going back to the last webinar that you guys did about aviation safety, where it's all about storytelling. And I think that is truly where it starts and improves. So if you take the high road and leave with dignity and respect, you have to have that courage to step away from a situation where you could be injured or killed.
Yeah.
But it's very important to do so with dignity and respect, rather than leaving the company and talking badly about it. But it is a decision. It is a choice.
Yeah. And the last month's show with Scott, we talked about the three basic systems in the real world: order, complex, and chaos. So this decision that a worker has to make, it's a dilemma. And because it's this kind of, it resides in the complex system. And it's uncertain because they don't know what the consequences will be. If I do this, I may not get that. I may get this instead, and that's going to vary from person to person. That's why when we say in the complex system, humans adjust to varying conditions, that's what we're really talking about, because that's that age of safety management that the person is facing. Humans adjusting to varying conditions. Now, you brought up another issue that generated comments in the chat panel as well. You said that HSE manuals are getting ignored. So let's go back and let's use the safety system graphic, which is this one. And can you talk us through that comment, maybe using this diagram?
Sure. Throughout the ages, companies have experienced regulatory noncompliance. And in order to be in compliance, in certain arenas, such as California, some countries, you're required to have an IIPP, which is an incident injury prevention plan. We see it as HSE manuals, policies, and procedures to be put in place that your employees are supposed to follow, and you're supposed to ensure implementation. I write these. And I can't tell you how many times these companies will go out on the internet. Maybe they task this to an administrative assistant. Go out and find us a safety manual. I did work at one point for what's known as Avetta now, which is a pre-qualification company. And of course, my job was to review the written safety manuals and policies and help them to beef those up. It was interesting to see some from New Zealand or other countries. And that's exactly what was happening, is an admin was tasked with finding safety manuals. They had no idea what they were looking for. They were not educated or skilled or knowledgeable. And by the way, that is my concern about artificial intelligence, going back to that for some companies. But it's this big binder they put on the shelf. It's never reviewed or discussed with the employees, or what they may do is say, okay, you have access to this, or it's in the office, come read it, but sign here that you've acknowledged that we have it, that you read and understood it, so that if anything happens, we're going to pull that out and say, but you knew. The other problem is that workers are not involved. The people actually doing the test, the people that are actually subjected to the hazards, who, by the way, many of them are the subject matter experts. They're the ones that know whether it's safe or not. And they have amazing ideas to make it safer. So it's our job as a safety professional to not just be the one who pushes the regulatory compliance or pushes our policies, but that also engages the workforce, that has those story opportunities, and engages and includes the workers in creating better policies and better safe work practices.
Yeah. I think this is a great example where safety management is, I could say, it's going through the motions, and the focus is on the end product, which, ooh, we have a manual. Here it is, tick the box. Where I think what you're telling people is that the systemic conditions that needs improvement is the process.
Yes.
Going through the process of making the manual, and more than that, including the workers to create what should be in and what doesn't have to be in creating policies and rules. In a previous show, I talked a bit about the experience I had where crews would have a little like pocketbook they could stick in the back pocket, carry with it with the golden rules. Then over time, as Scott said at the beginning, we like certainty, so we keep on adding more and more rules. And all of a sudden, this little binder became thicker and thicker and thicker, to the point where it was, you couldn't pack it around with you. You left it in the truck or in the office. Well, how useful is that? So we seem to oh my God, what did we do wrong, right? We need to revisit that, and I agree with you. And people won't know that until you hear the stories that people share. So yeah, I left the manual in the truck because it's too big to carry. Oh, okay. What do I do with that? Okay. Now you've dealt with various employers. You've mentioned a few things. Can you just maybe just give us from your experience and perspective some general thoughts and what's out there? What are employers doing?
Oh gosh. I see all,
Yeah.
I see the entire scale, right? Personally, I don't take on clients who it's going to be a check the box. I interview the clients before I even accept the work. You know, why is it that you want me to help you? What is your end goal here? If their answer is to meet OSHA or they had an OSHA issue, then I educate them and try to get them to, I want to make sure that my workers are safe and that they feel safe working for us. If they can't get to that, I don't want them as a client because it's going to be a box check. And that's not my purpose. That's not my mission. So I strongly encourage clients. And I have a perfect example. I'm very excited about a client I'm working with that when it started, all I heard from them, and I'm doing this through another consulting company. So it's not that I could choose them as I normally would. So it was more about let's get them started by meeting OSHA. Let's make sure that if OSHA showed up on site, that their folks would be able to handle it well, and really implement what needs to be implemented. They really do. They want to take care of their people. They always have. They've done a great job. They've got great tenure of their employees, so they're doing something right. They just need that outside assistance. They need that resource. And it's very exciting to watch them come along from conversations where they've said, no, we're not going to do this. No, we're not going to do that. Either because of money, because of time, because of whatever it is. And now they're seeing the light. They're saying, oh gosh, yes. Oh, this is important. Absolutely. So that's the excitement of what I do, and the excitement of being able to share my stories and implement the stories from the field, because that's what I do. I gather those stories from the field when I'm out, and I bring them back to the executives to discuss. And so watching those employers turn the corner, it's going from I'm executives or I'm the business owner and I have to do blah, 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 blah to meet regulatory compliance, to bringing back those stories from the field and allowing that connection from the ground to the ceiling that's helping them to see the light. Unfortunately, there are a lot of safety professionals out there who don't explain the whys, who don't share critical thinking skills, who don't share situational awareness and hazard assessment skills. It's more of a top down. It's regulation spouting, it's Nazism, it's and that can come, I know I'm kind of jumping ahead and I apologize, but it comes a lot from there are a lot of safety professionals out there that do not have the skills, that do not have the knowledge, that do not have the understanding of how to convey this, of how to nurture the storytelling and the sharing of that, and to connect. Because really, we're liaisons. We're liaisons between the workers and the executives. We've got to connect that so that the executives can see the light and turn the corner. And that's why things like this are so important, because it allows those who don't have options or opportunities to gather more insight.
So we're kind of in the halfway point. And we've covered a lot. So allow me to do a quick summary. So in this uncertainty series, we deploy a sense making rather than a fix it problem approach. What does that mean? It means that you've got to understand where you are currently situated. So today we presented diagrams, and you can see where you perhaps are on the S curve. We've talked about the evolution of business practices and how the evolution of safety thinking has mirrored that. We want to focus less on behaviors, but on the system conditions that influence why people behave the way that they do. And as Trish, as you said, people are natural storytellers. And if you're willing to listen, you will learn about the behaviors from the stories that they tell. Now, listening or reading too many stories, however, can actually cognitive overload the brain. So what we find out, and this will be the topic actually of next month's show, is it's easy to work with the patterns that stories naturally form. It's like viewing a picture on a computer screen. Our eyes look at the image formed by the millions of pixels because it's really difficult to look at pixels by themselves. So there's a pattern. And I think what you also talk about too, in construction, one of the patterns that's formed is it's all about the lowest bid. We saw that. And in construction or manufacturing, we've got now superintendents and they're storytellers as well. But not only are they expected to run the job, but they're expected to be on safety watch, and particularly in small and medium-sized. They play a whole bunch of different roles here. So it's not an easy thing, and we really empathize with them. So I think what we want to do is that don't feel that you have to do it all by yourself. You can engage the workforce and have collective intelligence. One of the things I like to say, I used to be a consultant. Now I call myself a complexity facilitator. Because I say, you don't need me as a consultant coming outside to tell you what's right or wrong. You have that wisdom and knowledge inside. So what I'll do is show you some process. Is how are your people being treated? It's about not fixing a problem, but discovering the hidden patterns in your organization. And what's really cool about working with patterns is that they will often reveal attitudes and beliefs held. The things that, if you want to use the iceberg model, the things that are underneath the waterline that nobody can actually see. So having set that summary here, I would like to spend the last part and just go through some of these statements that Trish, you came up with, and just use this particular approach to go through them. So the first one that comes is, OSHA doesn't have enough inspectors for me to worry about my site unless there's a fatality. So you look at that, what age is that coming in? I think it's the age of safety management. You agree with that?
I do.
Yeah. So, and what are some of those physical conditions? Right. So
yeah, so we have to go back to the fact that regulatory compliance is a huge piece of this.
Yes.
I personally hate the word compliance because it's all coming from blood. It's all coming from blood. And that's how I convey it.
Mm-hmm.
Again, you've got to, first of all, you have to find the trigger of each employee.
Mm-hmm.
What is it that's going to make them come to that aha moment of, yes, I have to be accountable and I have to own it without shoving a regulation or a policy down their throat.
Yeah.
The risk-taking attitude, as much as I hate to say it, when I first started out as a safety director, I would be brought into meetings that are pre-proposal meetings. And I literally would have to give a report. Okay, for this project, how many fatalities are expected? How many individual body parts are expected? And put a number, a cost to that. And then be told, okay, thank you very much, leave the room. And they would truly, this is heartbreaking, set aside a kitty. Rather than giving what I naively thought they would, which is a more time, more investment toward preventing those, they put money in a kitty. And at the end of the project, they would literally split anything left amongst themselves.
Oh, yeah.
And I know there are a lot of others out there that have been through that. So to watch it go from that, unfortunately, it still exists.
Yeah. And those are some of those systemic conditions that influence how people behave.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Right.
So yeah, and that's back to the bonus, right? You've got supervisors. They get a bonus based on production. those companies who want to make a difference and think that let's put in a reward system for safety. There's a reason OSHA is very against those, because we don't want to be the employee that keeps the pizza from being brought out for a pizza party.
Yeah.
Because we report a near miss or we report an injury, even if it's a first aid.
Yeah.
Right. So we as workers are creating an issue with that safety management system. But where does that come from? That comes from above to reward for the wrong things. Yeah.
So if you were engaging or with a prospect and they said to you, we have a zero tolerance policy, well, how would you respond to that? First of all, where's your mind thinking in terms of the diagram? Like, oh, zero tolerance policy. Where would you place that?
Gosh, again, I've got to go to safety management, only in a negative light. When we state that we have a zero tolerance policy, that is up for interpretation. It could be a positive thing. Typically, it's a negative thing. As a worker, zero tolerance to me would mean I have nothing to say, or what I have to say has no value or no meaning. Whatever they choose, whether it comes from ignorance or knowledge, I have no choice but to follow, which means I'm probably not going to be in a safe place. You know, there are a lot of interpretations that can come with that. Zero tolerance, I believe there has to be an exception to every rule, because in the exception, in the gray area, is where what you learn from the worker can change the interpretation of, say, a specific rule. I noticed in the chat, there's an audience member who is concerned. They work in a manufacturing environment. The workers are great about wearing their PPE. And what I'm getting from this chat, and correct me if I'm wrong, poster, but is your greatest issue is supervisors, executives are coming out on the floor and they're not following the proper PPE procedures. Well, what does that say to those on the floor? You know, we've got this rule in place, you better follow it or else. Hopefully making you understand that it's protecting you for your family. But we, as your management, we don't have to follow it. It doesn't apply to us. The best cultures I've seen are where nobody enters a PPE zone without an open-mindedness, where workers will come up to you. I don't care if you're the CEO, and say, hey, let's get you back through the door and get the proper PPE. I would hate to see your eye get knocked out because something flies across the facility. You know, we don't want to see your hearing affected, because your hearing's as important as mine is. You put these rules in place to protect me, we'll make sure we protect you.
Yeah.
And there's a loss in that middle space where, honestly, the mentality is our worst enemy, right? We're only going to be going through here for a minute. You know, it's a short-term exposure.
Yeah. And just to add on that too, zero tolerance policy, we noticed, you know, during the age of system thinking and engineering and business process reengineering, you know, if it works here, I guess it should work there. And we saw some inappropriate applications where efficiency standards like Six Sigma, obviously great for manufacturing, high reliability organizations, works well, but it's not good for services. I mean, services, you need that ability to flex. You need that ability to be resilient yourself. In fact, the best service companies are inefficient because they have that buffer to make adjustments. heroes adjusting to varying conditions. That's required. Okay. So here's one that I know really turns your crank. Workers need to use common sense. They should know better.
Oh gosh, yep, that's my platform. There is absolutely no such thing as common sense. I think that is the vainest mentality in the world. We assume, and we all know what assume means. We assume that the way we see things is the way everyone should see things. And from a corporate standpoint, that is the worst thing in the world. So we have to understand that every single person's common sense is different. And it all comes from your perspective, right? It comes from your environment growing up, what you've been exposed to, what education and knowledge you've accumulated. And that's truly what causes the most chaos, is that assumption. I actually created an entire training on this. And it's vital. I think it is the most important thing when it comes to safety or anything that has to do with any kind of culture, because you have to find a middle ground. How do we find a middle ground? How do we create common sense? We create it by coming together, by having folks all along the line, from executives all the way down to the workers. They all have to be involved, and we're back to worker engagement. And you've got to hash out for every single line item what the company's going to choose as common sense. We're going to document it. Hence our policies, our safe work procedures, our hazard assessments, and what we're choosing for mitigations, and how we're going to protect workers better. Yeah. Once we document it and we all accept this is what the company's common sense is going to be about this specific thing. Now we have to share that with the workers. We have to make sure they understand it. We need to train the workers on this. We need to give them an opportunity to ask the questions. And we have to be very kind. I think kindness is missing from a lot of companies. We have to be very kind, very open-minded. And we have to make sure that the workers understand the purpose and intent of whatever that common sense procedure is. And then we've got to follow up. We've got to observe. We've got to ensure that each worker is implementing this, and then kindly, again, have them share their story about why it works for them, why it doesn't. And it's a continuous improvement. Those who are involved in ISO, that understand the Plan, Do, Check, Act, that understand continuous improvement, it's all continuous improvement. And again, common sense is continuous improvement in all its glory. So, yeah, not very succinct, but
yeah. Well, this age of safety management is very interesting, because a lot of you know that Eric Hallnagel, he coined the term Safety One to describe our need to focus on what could go wrong, humans as hazards to be controlled. But he also introduced an alternative, Safety True, which is treating humans as heroes, adjusting to varying conditions so that things can go right. So really what we have in the age of safety management is a bit of messiness. Now, is Safety One and Safety Two conflicting views? Not really. It's not an either or, it's a both and. And we've talked about that, Scott and I, before in other shows here, where if Safety One is robustness, then Safety Two is resilience. And we quite often will associate certainty with robustness. Let's have all those rules in place there and barriers. But uncertainty is associated with resilience, that ability to flex and move and maybe be inefficient, but be effective on that one here. So how can we help workers develop common sense? Well, let's consider this case here. A worker comes on a situation at the work site. He's never seen it before. So he's faced with a dilemma. If I follow rule A, I violate rule B. So how does that person, Trish, apply common sense in this situation? What choices do they have?
Again, it's about speaking up for safety. When you don't, I don't care who you are. I don't care what level you're at. If there, especially when there's a direct conflict, you have to get clarity. How do you get clarity? Well, you could, and this is typically what happens, you talk amongst the other workers. You look for advice from the other workers who probably are just as confused as you are, but they're making it up as they go. And then you want to see policies and procedures go awry. That's typically why. There needs to be an open door policy and open-mindedness of supervisors and above for any worker who has any confusion or sees any conflicts to be able to go and ask about clarity. And then the smartest move is for the entire company to either do a stand down or a toolbox talk, some kind of safety meeting where they address that to everyone. Because if one is confused, more are confused. And if you see safety, your procedures going awry, well, you need to understand that people aren't coming to you for the answer. They're making it up as they go.
Yeah. You know, at those headquarters sessions or safety meetings, I think we need one more simple common sense rule. And it's a rule that where we treat humans as heroes, adjusting to various conditions here. And the rule I would like to have is, when is it okay to break or bend a policy or rule? What would that look like? And how many organizations out there right now, or people listening here, do you have that sort of rule? This is when you can break a policy or rule. If you don't have it, Trish, what sort of things should they consider in this rule?
Primarily, they need to consider, is this introducing more hazards than what it's fixing, or additional hazards from what it was meant? I'm very big on tertiary hazard assessment. And I go to the worker and teach them how to do it, where it's as simple as, what am I doing? What's the environment? What's the situation? Because it could be unique to what the rule or the process was designed for. What are the hazards? How am I protected? Either for what the company has put in place, where in this instance, it doesn't apply because it's going to create more of a hazard. Here comes our secondary hazard assessment, right? So within these parameters of mitigations that the company has put in place, what hazards did that introduce that perhaps they did not look into? And you've got to decide together with your supervisor, who's supposed to have the authority as a competent person, right, to keep you safe. Okay, what can we do in this moment that's going to alleviate that hazard? And then you do a tertiary assessment. Are there hazards that's going to introduce? And now it's time to really get involved, stop work, and get the other management and executives involved, so that we can create a common sense approach and mitigation to those hazards. I hate the word rules. I hate compliance. I believe that many times, yes. Look at ANSI. I belong to the American Society of Safety Professionals and many other organizations, continuity professionals, PMI, Project Management Institute, ASQ for quality. And what I will say amongst all of those, again, it's about continuous improvement. So having the mentality of it's a one and done approach, a one and done rule, we break the rules in order to make it safer. But it can't be an individual judgment.
Right.
It has to be a combined approach to move forward.
Yeah. And if I can summarize, that's what some organizations have done with their bend or break rule. They said, here are the three things you got to do. Number one, you cannot act alone. Okay, so for the person who goes like, oh, that worked for me before, I think I'll do it again. No, because the past does not predict the future. As you say, you must seek advice from an experienced worker who's maybe seen this situation before. So as you as an individual worker, do you actually have a master that you know who to go to that could ask this question? I've never seen this before. Have you guys seen it before? Now, if the answers come back, this is all new to us, then it's truly novel. Then you're right. Stop work, notify the experts. They got to figure this out. That way, I think, and I don't think anybody would disagree with that at all. So if you don't have that sort of rule in place, think about that. We know we're getting near the top of the hour, but Scott, just want to make sure, was there anybody out there that would want to make a comment before we wrap it up there? Anybody?
Yeah, well, I think Jim had posted a comment. I think both yourself and Trish
Yeah.
addressed it, and then Stacy was interested in connecting with Trish and learning more about your training. So we'll definitely, I included Trish's LinkedIn profile in the chat there if people want to connect with her on LinkedIn, and we'll definitely have her coordinates in the YouTube description once we post today's recording.
Okay. So let me just do a wrap up here, and I'll do that in terms of talking about Trish. And because you have a lot of experience with small and medium businesses, you've actually had a personal experience. And I read, and in January 2000, you owned and operated a tea room, an antique shop, gift shop. So tell us about your experience.
It was something that has always been a dream of mine. I was still working as a consultant. However, I had the opportunity to have my dream established, and it's not as risky, and that's a big problem, because in retail, in these types of instances, that mentality of, oh, we're not high risk. Well, there are a lot of risks, especially ergonomics. That's a huge one, which is across the board.
Mm-hmm.
I bought entire estates. Well, guess what? I needed workers to come in and pack and load all that stuff. Ergonomics were a big deal. So even if I hired people just for that one time, I had to make sure, and of course, me being me, we had an orientation on site about some of the hazardous things they would come across for trips, falls, ergonomic safe lifting, possible chemical exposures they might encounter. So as simplistic as that was, there were still hazards that could have caused fatalities. Yeah. There were still hazards that could have caused amputations. There were still hazards that could have caused injury and soft tissue injuries. So I encourage anyone who becomes an entrepreneur that brings anyone on, I don't care if there's somebody that's just brought in to answer the phone. You have to understand what could cause an injury, and you have to invest that time and effort in providing for their safety. So yeah, I'm a little weird, but it's what I do. It's my mission in life. It's my passion in life, is to help keep people safe.
Well, it's nice that you practice what you preach.
I do. I do. I'm so over the top that if I have to drive, I'm in Houston, welcome to Houston, 2 hours across the city. If I have to be across the city for a very early morning meeting or site visit, I will actually drive across the night before and get a hotel room. Wow. Rather than have to put myself at risk in rush hour traffic. If there's a thunderstorm coming, I will pre-position myself to be there, and I will put the word out. Look, anybody who's invited to this meeting, you've got to be open to the fact that either they won't be there at all because you're risking their lives, or they're going to be late.
Yeah, great. Well, we're at the top of the hour, so Scott, I'm going to turn this back to you, and maybe you want to say a few words about your plan to expand the Safeopedia platform.
Yeah, well, I think in part and parcel with Safeopedia trying to bring free environmental health and safety resources to the industry. If you're familiar with us, you're probably familiar with Safety Connect, which is our annual virtual conference, which we launched in 2020. And through that, we've really built a community. And so last year, we started playing around with a community platform where safety professionals could come and connect and collaborate and support each other. And we learned a lot. It was sort of a soft launch. And so we're working on building in all the learnings from the past year and kind of doing a public launch. So we'll include, again, a link to the Safeopedia community in the description in YouTube, and we'll definitely be sending emails out inviting people to come and join the Safeopedia community as well.
Great, awesome. Well, thanks, Trish, for joining us today for this session. And like I said, next month, we're going to keep on going on, and we're going to look at that last age of cognitive complexity, and we'll talk more about humans as storytellers.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Trish, for joining today, and Gary, always a fantastic job hosting. So, and thanks everyone for logging in and joining us this morning or this afternoon.
Okay.
Thanks for allowing me to, Thanks for allowing me to speak with y'all.
Okay, take care.
Have a
Bye.
safe weekend.